Okay, I had to basically run. It's from the mosquitoes. This is crazy up here. I have never, since I've been up here, had that many mosquitoes. I ran back here, thankfully so far, until they find me. I feel like I'm safe back here from them. But anyway, this is back here where the silver pin location was in the back field, where, we initially thought the remains were found. So I ran back here. I'm in the shade cooling off, but I don't know what's going on in that area over there. But the mosquitoes are just eating me alive in there. And one thing I want to point out quick, I touched on this earlier, it is very dry up here. Somebody wanting to come and search this little field, where the pinned location was, it is completely dry. And I've been stomping through it a little bit. It's still difficult, as you can see, due to the weeds, and see how thick, so something's laying in here. But the good thing is there appears to be no water at all, which means that the threat of water moccasins laying in there is a little less likely. The only thing you might have to keep an eye out for is a rattlesnake or a stranded gator, that got stuck in here when the water dropped, and he's like, but usually they'll crawl out and go somewhere else. But you could definitely, if somebody wanted to put together a search team, now is your chance to come in here and really comb this area. As you can see, this is what you're dealing with. See, these are areas where people's kind of tried to walk through. But look here. This is what you're dealing with. And if a gun was ditched out into here, or cell phones were thrown out into here, how would you ever, without a metal detector, find them? I mean, I feel like I'm walking on like 2 feet thick of dead grass right now. See, this was all underwater every time I came out here. Like ankle to calf deep water. I've never stood in the middle here like this. But it's just insane. I don't even see how you would ever find anything. I can see the paths where the hogs walk through. That's kind of what I'm following. But, if you put some effort into this and had a group of people, for safety reasons, me doing this by myself is probably not smart, but would go, there's no water in here at all. It's completely dry, so what that tells me is that the other areas of the swamp, like we were talking about out back here, you could probably walk way out there if you wanted to. I kind of searched this area the second time I was down here. I went and searched around that tree. So and there's been other people in here, so I don't really think there's probably anything in here. Good thing is there's no mosquitoes. Boy, I tell you what, they were just eating me alive over there. A lot of hog activity over there where the crime circles are too. Evidence circles. So anyway, I want to get back a little bit on this. Okay, here's the drainage canal. We got some fresh pig activity down through here. Once again, any remaining items that went past this silver pin location, they went out there into that big swamp marsh area. But back on the thing with the parents. Anyway, what I think I forgot in my ramblings, I think there was a deal cut. Because here's the thing. If you remember, Chris Laundrie came up here on the 7th with that single law enforcement dude, which I'd like to find out. It'd be nice if they would interview him or name him or who that guy was. And where exactly did those guys search? It'd be interesting to know that. I think what possibly was going on here, because you have to ask yourself, Well, if the Laundries knew the remains were up here, like Brian's body was here, why didn't they show it to him on the 7th, 13 days earlier than when it was found, 13, 14 days earlier? What I'm thinking is there were still negotiations going on with the FBI and the DA through their attorney. And I think basically what they knew they had taken the gun. They knew they had possibly moved some items around. Possibly even, maybe Brian shot himself at the house there and they brought him up here, brought his body up here. But regardless of that, I think they were still negotiating. Chris came out here with that officer that day. They were in that green gator. They parked down there on the Livelong Trail, down there at the sign. So we know that for a fact. How far did he bring them up here? Could it have been that they were in the middle of negotiating and Chris was waiting for a message, or both parents, from their attorney that, hey, go ahead, you're clear. Go ahead and, take them to the area. So he might have been just stalling, sandbagging in here, walking around, and not, not really being, up front. Like, he might have just took them over. Well, we used to walk the Livelong Trail, walked along the canal there. Maybe showed them the swing where they took the picture with the nephews, and possibly even up to the tree swing area, but kept them away from this side of the access trail where the remains were found. And they didn't get they didn't get the message that they were hoping to get on the 7th. So somehow they just ended the search and they left. Because, they were only up here that day for like 2 hours. Well, you can't do a lot of searching in an area like this in just 2 hours. That's barely enough time to walk up the Livelong, trail and then kind of look around, and then walk back to your truck and be back home in 2 hours. So that search was cut short that day for some reason. And there's probably a reason behind that. Then they probably continued to negotiate, and finally the FBI DA probably caved and said, just, we got to end this nonsense. And they probably made a deal, if we can locate Brian's remains, no questions asked, everything's off the table up to that point. And I'll get to that here in a minute. Up to that point of finding the remains. I really think that's what went down. They probably got the okay, yes, that's what we'll do. The Laundries come up here on the 20th or the 21st, whatever day that was, of October. And within 30 minutes, remains are found. So, and I think what the Laundries, I think they knew right, the parents knew right where to go. I think what they were doing is sandbagging as they were coming up the trail, making it look like they're just looking, because they wanted the 2 officers that was with them, they wanted them to find, obviously, they might have saw Brian when he first shot himself, They probably did not want to see their son in a decomposed state. So I think they were sandbagging, holding back, and just trying to direct law enforcement to make it appear they're the ones that found the remains in the general area. And it probably wasn't going as quick as they were hoping to. They're probably thinking, they're starting to panic. That would be a nervous situation to begin with. And the law enforcement, wasn't finding what they were wanting them to find. So once they got up, and it would be better if I'd be out on the service trail, I could explain that easier. But that area, where Chris turned, and everybody's like, he turned and went in and found the dry bag. I'm thinking what it was is they knew that he was laying up there at the front of the trail up there where the field is, where we talked about earlier, kind of where the crooked tent with crime scene tape. I think that they really started to sandbag at that point, and I think he took off just like, I got to do something here. And I think he just took off because they did not want to walk up there because they knew that's where the remains were. And I think he just came cutting through here and he popped out right here. And I think he just randomly found that dry bag. That dry bag was probably up there with the remains and it just floated back here. Because remember we discussed all the water paths that come back here. So that's probably how that ended up back here. And I think he did. I don't think he knew, because why would you scatter that stuff out all over the place like that? That don't make sense. It makes more sense they came up. Everything was laying there with Brian. They took the firearm, left him lay there, said their goodbyes, grieved, whatever, and just left him lay there. And then due to weather, nature, whether it was wildlife, water, whatever, the dry bag ended up right here in this area right here. So, Chris then finds that. So now that gives him the opportunity, him and his wife, to, hey, tell law enforcement you're in the right area, look what we found. They kind of then backed off, they were told to go back down to the trail. It was basically, I'm just kind of piecing that together, and then law enforcement eventually found the remains up there, is what I think went down. What would be really nice, and maybe this is something that the internet community, social media internet community, maybe we need to petition and see if we can get that footage released, the entire unedited footage from Fox News the day that the laundries came up here and found the remains. Because it would be really interesting just to see what actually took place, why he turned back here, what took place, because they walked down this way, which I feel is odd. They were standing there, there's where the picture was with them holding the dry bag, and then they walked back this direction. Did they toss a gun? Cell phone? Did they toss some items back here as they were walking out? That we don't know. And so I'm going to kind of look in this area a little bit, thinking that maybe, now if you do kind of walk, they could have walked back here and see this water path. This is another one. This isn't kind of the exact spot where we said he went in, where those railroad ties were. But this will still literally, like if you peek through here, that literally just 75 yards out that way, you're back on the access trail. So they could have just maybe walked and followed this waterway. But did they come back here to ditch something? And then the reason that they're back up here in the park is they're trying to remember where they threw that crap back here. Because if you remember, it was stated that Fox News guy said he saw the Roberta pick up some items off the ground and then either put them in the bag, or I'm not sure what, he said she did with them. So is it possible that they walked back around here away from law enforcement? You got this little grassy field back here. You got all this brush. Nobody's really been back in this area. So is it possible that something's ditched back in here somewhere? So that's my thinking as far as any left remaining places, because like I told you, I feel like there's nothing up here. I think this area has been scrubbed. I don't think there's anything up here. Other than this would probably be an area to search and could be a possibility. Boy, as soon as I get into the woods, the mosquitoes are just eating me alive. I'm going to go back out here. That's why I'm not walking around as much. I'm kind of circling out here because there's no mosquitoes. I've never seen the mosquitoes this bad down here since I've been coming down. Crazy. But anyway, here's the, and I think this might be where the parents actually, because they walked down, like they were standing that photo of them with the dry bag right there. And then that pinned location is over there. And they walked this direction, and I'd really like to see the rest of the footage. Did they go that way? Did they go back there and throw something in the swamp back there? Or did they walk straight back out here onto the access trail? We just don't know. I don't want to go back in there. The mosquitoes are just terrible. So I don't know. But that's my theory on that. As far as I think there was a deal made, I think it came through. That's why they came up here, and there's no questions asked. Now I think, like I said, I still think the families, the Gabby's families, they know a lot more than we do, and the DA. And I think what they're looking at is what can the laundries be charged with? Have they done something since the remains were found? Meaning, have they still continued their cover-up in doing certain things, because remember, they've probably made a deal up until the point that the remains were recovered. Then everything from that point going forward up to the present is back again off the table, meaning if you do anything, they're coming after you. So they've been probably, they're probably worried that there's still some items up here. They were up here looking for something. What that is, now I seen them up here, or I didn't even see them, I saw their truck parked in the parking lot right beside my car. And we were the only two vehicles in the parking lot that day. So they were up here for some reason, doing what, I don't know, because I didn't see them. So, I'm just speculating at that point. For all we know, they could have just been walking Powerline Trail. I don't know. But I think they were up here looking. Hopefully people's been keeping an eye, and maybe there's more eyewitness accounts of them coming up here in the past 2 weeks since I've been coming up, or since I saw him up here, or saw the truck up here parked in the parking lot. So, but I really think that's what is probably, I think eventually we're going to find out that that's probably what took place. I could be completely wrong. But in this case, just every time they come out and they speak about anything, it just gets more bizarre and more questions are raised. It's like, how have we had 3 opportunities to discuss this firearm situation, and not once is it brought up, but yet in the autopsy, they bring it up that he died from a gunshot wound to the head. How ridiculous is that? I mean, come on. That's just the most ridiculous thing. You never mentioned that there was firearms involved in this from the beginning. Now, there was reports, I remember, Brian Enton, and I remember reading some of the early reports when Brian went missing, but it was never officially stated by law enforcement or the FBI that there was a family firearm. I do remember that being, just the word was out there, that there was a family firearm missing, and it was the one that was possibly the mother's, and it was in the glove box of the Mustang. It was one that they had kept in the glove box in the Mustang. I did hear that, but that wasn't like from any official source. That was just from people talking, people talking and people on the internet. And I think Brian Enton maybe made a report to the fact that there was a firearm missing, a family. All firearms were turned in, and there was one missing firearm. So that does make sense there. But outside of that, there's never officially been any mention of a firearm involving Brian whatsoever. None. And they've had 3 opportunities since he's come back from Northport, or from out west, when he got back to Northport on the 1st. They've never mentioned that Brian had a firearm near him, on him, or around him. Not once. So, and then you claim that he died from so how do you know he wasn't shot by somebody else? I mean, I'm going with he did it himself. I'm pretty positive that's the case. But, when you make a statement like that, that leaves open the door. You're going to have a lot of people going, well, if there wasn't a firearm laying by the remains, how do you know he shot himself? How do you know this was self-inflicted? I mean, these are just very basic, general, common sense questions that for some reason they feel like they can throw this info out there and just leave it hanging like that. I just don't get it. And there may be a reason for it. It could be that they know that the parents recovered that firearm early on. They feel like they've probably ditched it somewhere, and they don't want to talk about it too much because they want them to get caught trying to find it or to move it again. They don't really want us up here looking for it, because if we find it, well, then we're kind of finding it and not them. So that could be the ploy that's going on. So, but I really feel like with that report that came out the other day, that's only going to encourage people to be up here looking for this firearm. And like I said, I think it's a very slim shot that it's even still up here. But then when you look at the terrain, look at this field right here. How easy would it have been for them to you know, they found the dry bag here, maybe, well, the day that they found the remains early on, they could have walked back here and just threw that firearm, and I just showed you guys how deep that grass is. Unless you go through there with a metal detector and grid that whole area off and metal detect every square inch of it, you're not going to find that gun. I mean, you could go through, remember how I got lucky and I hit that stake last week with my stick? I could go through there poking my stick and get that, but you know what that is? That's like playing the lottery. That's just the chances of that. But, you know, they could have walked back here and tossed that thing in this, or the field up front where the crooked tent was. Did they throw it out in there? Did Brian have cell phones? You know, his and Gabby's cell phones that obviously would have been turned off and deactivated at that point. But, you know, did Laundries take that stuff off his belongings and toss that stuff out in here somewhere? You know, this is all stuff we have to think about. So that's kind of what I'm going to do today. I mean, the search, like I said, it almost feels at some point pointless coming up here and just continuing the same pattern of walking around the same areas. But that's usually when you're just thinking you're giving up, that's usually when something new pops up. So, you know, I enjoy being down here. It's beautiful down here. It's a beautiful day. So I'm going to continue looking around, and I'm sure other people are doing the same. And we need to find all this out until they come out now and explain how the remains was found with a gunshot wound to the head and no mention of a firearm. I don't understand the mystery behind this gun. I don't understand the FBI or law enforcement. I don't understand the whole mystery or the what do you want to call it, the reluctance to speak about this firearm. You know, I just don't understand it. It just does not make sense. I mean, you would think that right away they'd have said, yeah, he took off from the house on the 13th, and yes, he does have a firearm in his possession. So if you're out there looking for him, this is when people thought he was still alive. You need to consider this dude, you know, armed and dangerous. You know, he may, not that he's out trying to kill people, but, you know, if he gets cornered and freaks out, he may, you know, take somebody else along with him, you know. That would have been important news. I find that weird that they wouldn't mention that. You know, and then the fact that, you know, that there's possibly a firearm laying up here in the park, you know, that a kid could come across. I just find it really weird, their reluctance to bring up any info on this firearm. There's a story. The more they do, they're creating more stories. There's a whole story behind that now. Why the reluctance to come clean or come out with information on this firearm? It just doesn't make sense. And all you're doing is you're keeping people hooked, even more so, because now it looks like there's more covering up going on, or there's just something not jiving. But it could be as simple as they're waiting. They might be watching the parents, and they're trying to kind of trap them into looking for this evidence. They feel they probably know there's some things missing, and they're probably waiting for the parents to go and try and retrieve it. And that could be what's going on. So they're keeping hush-hush about it. And that makes sense. I totally would buy that explanation. The problem is, you know, we're talking about it now, and if they hear that, they're going to start thinking the same thing. So maybe they will stop looking for it. And then it'll just be up to us or somebody, you know, just somebody randomly walking through and finding the stuff. I'm dreading walking back in there. Let's try it and see what happens. We're going to walk through where Chris came through when he found the dry bag. And then I'm going to shut the camera off and then just start looking around. But right there's the picture that was taken of them holding the dry bag, and then they walked right back here. I don't know where they went, though, after that. I'd really like to see that footage. But this is where he walked through. I found it interesting that somebody, you know, we think it might be the Laundries. or their sympathizers coming up